Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Cassian Andor from Andor Season 1. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. We recently did a rewatch of the fantastic Andor series, and of course it got me thinking about my Andor collectibles. I like to display my Star Wars action figures, the Vintage Collection and Black Series, clustered by movie or series, and because space is always at a premium, I generally have to wait until I've got a few before I do the big reshuffle to make space for a new series. So when Andor came out, I knew I wanted to add the figures to my collection, but I wanted to have a few before I undertook that big task of shuffling everything around to make space. And you know what? Hasbro just hasn't put out as many Andor figures as I think they should have. So I'm done waiting. It's time to get them out and on display. I've opened up quite a few Vintage Collection and Black Series figures. I recently opened up the Black Series Cassian figure, the equivalent to this one, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm really excited to open up this Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Cassian from Series 1 of Andor. He looks fantastic. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, of course, I'll get this figure out. We'll go over all of the details and the articulation. But first, let's take one last look at the backing card. The Vintage Collection backing cards obviously take a lot of inspiration from the original vintage Kenner Star Wars action figures from the 1970s and 80s, and it's really nostalgic to see this style continuing on for modern collectors. We have the Star Wars logo here across the top with a single chrome racetrack surrounding the Andor series logo here in red. I really like the O being the Andor series version of the Rebellion bird symbol, really cool. And of course we have a single chrome racetrack surrounding the character art here on the side. Now I really like the promotional image that they have here for Cassian Andor. It's just the perfect blend of lighting. There is a lot of dark lighting in the Andor series just to kind of fit the mood of the series. It's not a cheerful series. There are some humorous moments, but of course it has a bit of a somber tone, so I really like the lighting here. Despite the fact that it has a little bit of an overall dark tone to the background, I can still very clearly see Cassian and the details of his costume. I like his expression. His face is in a good position in terms of the card, not too cut off, not too in the background there, just a really nice balance. I think it works really well for the Andor series. And for this version of Cassian, we have an orange, a little bit of a lighter orange here for the nameplate with black font. It reads Cassian Andor, and that same orange used behind the figure here. I really like it when I can clearly see the costume details between the reference art here and the figure packaged alongside it. Nice to see. We have just one accessory. We have a blaster pistol here, but of course we've got a lot of details here to go over on his costume as well. We have the Kenner logo there on the bottom, which is really fun, and of course we have the warning symbol there in the modern toys up there on the top right. Moving on to the back. Now this one is a little bit older. This is VC261, where we still had the backing card style that was a little bit more closely styling from the original Kenner era, where we had the black background, a lot of vintage style with the colors here for the images of other figures that we could buy from the same wave. Of course, this backing card style has been replaced with a newer version where we have that accent color used across the back and a blurb and just more about the singular figure. We don't have pictures like this one. Personally, I do like this one. It's very nostalgic, obviously referencing the original Kenner, sort of collect them all graphics on the back of the vintage Kenner backing cards, but I understand why there is a little bit more of a focus on the character and the specific figure in the newer style. For this older style, of course, we still have the twin chrome racetrack Star Wars logo encircling some of the other figures, some really cool ones there. Of course, we have the Vintage Collection logo here on the back, and unlike the original Kenner ones, we have a lot of modern text that has to be included because of modern requirements for toys. So we have the barcode, warning for not for small children, and of course a lot of copyright text and all of that. Takes up about half the card. It's a little bit of a shame. Of course, those original Kenner ones were just full of vibrant nostalgic images of Star Wars toys that you were trying to hunt down and add to your collection. Overall, I really like this card. You can see why I kept this one on its backing card for quite this time. Sometimes I'm not too sure if I'm going to be opening them up. I do keep a select few on their backing cards just as a representation and for some of my favorite characters. And I think this one was really cool. Cassian on an Andor card. I really like the presentation, but I really want to build up my Andor figure display, so I'm going to be opening this one up right now. So now I have the Cassian figure and his one blaster accessory out of the packaging so we can go over all of the details. And I have to say, straight out of the packet, he did take a little bit of tweaking to actually stand up. So I'm sure when I play around with the articulation, it's going to take a little bit of tweaking to really get him into a standing upright position. I was a little bit worried there because he has this really heavy plastic jacket. He does want to tip backwards. I was really worried I'd have to sort of have the figure a little bit hunched over in order to get him balanced. I got there in the end, but I do worry a little bit about how well I'm going to be able to sort of get some interesting poses and still find that good center of gravity to get him standing upright. So we'll go over the details and then we'll get into the articulation and a little bit of posing as well. And I do have a couple of other Cassian figures from the vintage collection to also do just a little bit of comparison right there at the end, because he does have a few sort of differences in terms of his sort of hair, his facial hair, and of course his outfits. And sometimes it's fun to see different versions of the same character alongside each other when you get them out and on display. So I'm really keen to see those together. So I really like the face sculpt that Hasbro has managed to do for Diego Luna, who of course plays Cassian Andor in both Rogue One and the Andor series. I think they really capture his likeness really well. I especially think when I'm looking at a figure and I can sort of hear the character's voice, sort of see scenes from the movie or series in my mind's eye when I'm looking at the character toys, that's when Hasbro's done a really good job in terms of the details and the likeness, and I've got it going here. I can hear the voice. It's really cool. So because his hair is a little bit longer here, we've actually got a separate sculpted piece for the hair, which means that we get some really good detail rather than it being a little bit flatter and sculpted as part of the head here. So I can see that there is almost a little bit of a shadow along the hairline because we've just got a little bit of separation there. But of course it does help because Cassian has slightly messy hair than some other characters that we've seen. He often has sort of long strands falling over his face. So I really like the fact that Hasbro's opted for a secondary piece here, just so we get a little bit of definition around the hair. And it comes over his ears, which is nice there as well. Quite long in the back. It's kind of hitting here on the back of the jacket. So I feel like that is going to be a bit of a limiting factor with being able to tip his head back. It just stops there with the jacket. Thankfully, we don't need to sort of tip Cassian's head too far back. He's not an Imperial. He doesn't sort of have that quite sort of high sort of eye line. We can sort of have him looking a little bit down, but yes, that does impact. I can't tip that back. Of course, I can tip it just a little bit forward there in the front, but not really. We do get pretty good side to side articulation there. Of course, we've got some really nice digital printing there for his eyes. And his beard is digitally printed, a little bit thicker than other versions of Cassian, which we'll see later on with a bit of a comparison. We've actually got some sculpted hair here as well, with the painting applied over top to sort of give it a bit more of a thicker. He's been growing this one for a little bit while. It's above sort of stubble compared to some of the other versions of Cassian that we see. But it looks like the printing is pretty straight there. I can just start to see those sort of telltale dots coming in on the cheek where the painting is getting sort of a little bit more feathered out and trying to sort of fade out there onto the cheek there. Really nice sort of just accuracy there in terms of his face. I like that. So moving on, he's got a complicated costume with this one, and it's always really impressive. Sometimes I think Hasbro can shy away from some of the slightly more complicated costumes. I'm always thinking about some of the Queen Amidala and Padme Amidala figures. There are some fantastic outfits that Hasbro's just never really attempted, despite the fact she's so central in the prequel series. So when it comes to some of these ones with lots of layers and more details, it's fun to see. Of course, I do want to see some of the simpler costumes, like Cassian's Narkina 5 prison outfit. Of course, that's very simple. It's just that sort of top and pants. They don't even have shoes. I still want to see that one, but I really do like seeing the detail here. This is a complicated costume. I had so much fun going over the Black Series 6-inch version of this particular Cassian outfit. I'm sure that this one will be fun as well. So, of course, we've got a thick jacket, which does tend to impact the articulation a little bit, which I'm hoping we'll still get the range that we want later on. But we have one split here in the back, but I gotta say, you can kind of see by the cross section, that is a thick amount of plastic, really, and that's going all the way through. That's not like a lip edge just for the sake of the split there. That is as thick as that plastic is. There is a lot of it there. You can see sort of down by the bottom, it feathers out a little bit. It's a little bit thinner here on the front edge, but still it's one of the sort of stiffer coats that I have seen. I wasn't expecting the plastic to be quite that thick in the back. I thought I'd be able to sort of bend it a little bit easier. I can sort of flex it up. We can see some of the printing and details there on the inside, but we do have that sort of circular notch at the top of the split, but I've found it's not exactly foolproof. If you try too hard, you will create a split, so I'm going to try and not stress that too much. I thought maybe for this coat we might even have the slits on each side, kind of at the side seam where it sort of lines up with pants. Hasbro will often put a split there even when one doesn't exist on the original costume, just to sort of aid in flexibility and articulation, but we don't have that there, just that one there in the back. So it's possibly going to be a little bit tight. I don't think Cassian is sort of a character that's going to be doing high kicks or a lot of jumping action. He tends to be sort of a stand and shoot character. So I'm not too worried, and especially because this jacket is heavy, I think it's going to play a big element with the balance, as I saw when I was just trying to get him to stand up straight earlier. So I do like with the modern figures how tight these sort of extra pieces are, because although the jacket is supposed to be a one piece, of course in modern action figures these sleeves are sort of hard cast with the arms, and then this sort of a vest section of the jacket is a separate piece. So technically there is separation here around the arms, and I used to think way back when on some of those old prequel era Jedi costumes, the gap around at the shoulders was quite large. You could see all the way through and see the tunic underneath. It is so tight and neat there. There is no gap. I can't see like through there, and even when I raise it up I can only just see through the plastic on the underside there, and I still get some really nice movement here with the arms. It's not really affecting the way that I can move the arms around being that neat tight. So even though they're two separate pieces, they're not really joined, it looks like this is all sculpted together, which is really great. That's what you want. So we do have this large collar that is folded down on both sides, and it is actually sort of cast in this position. It's not sort of folded over. I can't lift that up, and this large sort of buckle piece on the collar might interfere with the arms going forward. Just going to see if that's going to bend out of the way. Okay, so that is going to flex a little bit and I can get the arm past it. I was a little bit worried that that might sort of interfere. The one on this side is much smaller. That's just going to flex out of the way there. So I'm really liking just how much I can move. There's a little bit of creaking going on. Sometimes, of course, we're rubbing against the sort of slightly rubbery plastic there. It does give us that sort of squeaking noise, but it's not fighting me, which is the main thing. I don't like it when action figures, I feel like I'm really stressing the plastic to get the poses that I want. And I can get his arms up quite high, actually, a little bit higher than straight across. Sometimes we get them to sort of a little bit more like this, and I'm happy he can actually go just a little bit higher, which is nice because, of course, I think of the arms a lot more for blaster wielding positions there. We've got a really nice two-tone paint job over the jacket. We've kind of got this, I want to say kind of like a warmer chocolatey brown, and then we've got this very dark brown for a lot of the trim and the sleeve elements. There is a lot of sculpting surface detail here. We can see the texture of the jacket, the sort of the leathery type wrinkles and things like that coming through on the sculpting. I like how the modern vintage collection figures, it's not just straight plastic, you know. We've got a lot of these little creases. We've often got little stitch lines and details. The hood here is sculpted a little bit flat. There isn't much of sort of like an interior that we could potentially see up the top there. It's very flat, but that does mean that it gives it quite sort of a nice low profile. Sometimes, particularly with some of the soft goods ones, the cloaks, the hoods can sort of really sit out and look a little bit ballooned out. That's a really nice flat. Perhaps a little bit too flat, but I don't mind. I'm not going to be looking there at the back much. And sometimes when it comes to certain garments, the hoods do hang very flat, so I don't mind that. It could be just a little bit sculpted open, but I don't think it would change my opinion of the actual figure and the details if it was sort of sculpted to be hanging open a little bit more there. Overall, some really nice details here for, of course, the 3.75 inch scale. The Black Series, a larger scale. With the 6 inch, you can get a little bit more onto it, but this is a really nice jacket for this figure. Moving on to the shirt underneath, he actually has a lot of costume details here as well. We've got a really minor little look there at an undershirt, and then we've got this sort of a blue shirt, and he's got sort of a little bit of a vest detail going on here. Now, there is one element of this that's a little bit awkward to me, and instead of having those sort of splits on the side of the jacket like I had mentioned earlier, we have them on the inside here of the undershirt, which is kind of interesting because I guess they want to still give us the ability of kicking the leg forward, and because that tunic, that shirt comes down a little bit lower, it might restrict it, but it does give an odd kind of appearance when we split that open. It's got a very wide cutout, and yeah, it looks a little bit awkward to me. It's reasonably well hidden by the jacket, I do have to say. I only sort of really notice it when I flare the jacket open, which of course that's not going to happen when it's on display, but it does just look a little bit odd when I kick the leg forward. It's not my favorite way of adding in articulation, because for me personally, when push comes to shove, I will take accuracy over articulation, but I am not the most adventurous with my poses. And I know that the articulation of the vintage collection figures is very important to many collectors, so I can't speak from just my perspective there. So I do like that they have made sure that we can still move the legs around, but it's just, I think the cutouts are perhaps just a little bit large. When I think about even just the narrowness of the split in the back of the jacket, I feel like this cutout is wider with a larger notch there at the top, but I do like the details that we've got here. And it's a shame sometimes where there's a lot of costume details that Hasbro includes and it's tucked away under something that we're never going to see unless we're doing this, splaying the rubber jacket all the way out. So we can see his belt there. We've got some really nice gold painted detailing. Now I thought it was interesting on the Black series, one of these little gold buckle details was painted sort of asymmetrically. It was like not lined up with the sculpting. Nice to see that on this vintage collection version, the paint is lined up to the sculpting details quite nicely. They're not misaligned there. And we've got a bit of a cutout here. So of course we've got this sort of hip strap slung across his right hip that has been cut into by that sort of split there, which is a little bit unfortunate, but again, the articulation is important. And then we've got some sort of silver tools and sort of little communication things being holstered there. Again, nice tidy silver paint there. Of course, hidden when we have his jacket laid down. I've kind of stretched it out a little bit, but it'll lie flat soon enough. And yeah, it's just a nice little detail that's there, part of the original costume. But to be honest, unless we're physically holding the jacket open, we're never really going to see that. But I like that Hasbro does include those details there. So when he's standing naturally, I can just kind of peek some of the details there to the side, but I still like that they have included them. Sometimes when things aren't quite visible, Hasbro can sort of, save some money and not include all of the details. I like that there. We've got nice tidy paint for the green stripe details here on the front of his blue tunic there. Again, some really nice fabric sculpting. I like it when we get those creases in that. Just really makes it look like fabric scaled down to action figure size there. Moving on, the rest of his costume has a lot of detail, but not a lot of difference in terms of colors here. So he's got these sort of dark green sort of cargo pants, if you will. We've got some big belchy pockets here on the front there. We've got a little bit of a color difference here around the knees, a little bit more of those pants, and then we've got ankle boots. Now the ankle boots have some really cool strap details going on here. Some really nice detail. We can even see the little sort of tread there on the boot. Very nice. I like these straps. It's almost a shame that we don't have sort of any kind of paint to really highlight this. I know it generally takes a very specific character or specific scene for Hasbro to give us kind of like muddy weathering or sort of splatters or anything like that across the lower part of the body. I don't really think of Cassian as being very muddy in this particular outfit. He primarily wears this on Ferrix, which is more of a dry, dustier planet, so it's not going to make sense for him to be sort of muddy or anything like that. But it's just a shame when you've got some really cool detail and it's just a little bit lost because we just have that one tone color of plastic there. But that's just me. Sometimes I feel like I just want to see some some weathering to just really highlight some cool details there, but he looks cool. Okay, apart from those pouches and that, and just some cool fabric sculpting, not much to go over on the legs, but just going to do some quick articulation of some of the limbs. Of course, we did a little bit of his arms, but let's check out his elbows. Oh, that was a nice bend. Okay, sometimes when they're fresh out of the packet, they can be a bit tight. He bent those elbows really fast. That's really nice. And of course, we can see that we've got a side-to-side articulation there of his hand. Now, sometimes when we have these big coats and things like that, it comes up very close to those articulation points. So I'm not really gonna get much in the way of side to side, I feel. Get a little bit that side. It's not really gonna stay very bent to one side though. It's very, very minimal compared to, say, if we had just a bare forearm there. But of course we can still turn the hands around there. He's got a very nice extended trigger finger there, which should be good for holding the included blaster pistol. It's nice and separated from the rest of the fingers there. And this hand, I have to say, this one's actually got an extended trigger finger there as well, which is actually, in my experience, kind of a little bit uncommon when it comes to Star Wars action figures. A lot of the time, the left hand is more of just a classic C grip, just for holding a generic accessory, or sometimes for the underside of a blaster rifle. It's really interesting to see that we actually have an extended trigger finger on the left hand. Really interesting. That's going to be fun. So I'm going to test the blaster rifle in both hands. So this one, we also have a side-to-side articulation there as well. Of course, we can rotate it. But again, we've got a very long jacket sleeve here. So I don't think we're really going to get much in the way of actually being able to utilize that articulation there. Sometimes I know that that's part of their structure, how they make action figures, but I'm not really able to get much movement in that at all. So, of course, on some vintage collection action figures, we have sort of a mid-torso articulation point sort of hidden under, say, Stormtrooper armor or Clone Trooper armor. It's a nice point. Because he has this long shirt, we have it here at his belt, the sort of the original sort of position we think back to old action figures, and he can actually turn fairly well, but he kind of wants to snap back to center. You can kind of see he's snapping back there. I don't know if I can find the sticking point, because it's like an action move. He's kind of just, he's turned all the way around and he's still coming back to center. I can't find, oh, there was a click there, but he's still snapping back to center. That's a little bit odd. You can usually, sometimes they sort of hold the position. Reminds me of some of those sort of old prequel era action moves. He just wants to snap back. I've twisted him all the way around. So he's looking out the back and he's just flicking back. So a little bit odd there. It's not as good as those mid-torso ones where you can just smoothly turn them around, get some really good, or sometimes you find those ones that have sort of a clicking point and you can kind of get them turning to the side, then they want to stay there and then they come all the way back to center. I haven't really come across that much in vintage collection figures. I generally find a little bit of a smoother articulation. He does not want to turn to the side, which is a little unfortunate, because I feel like because we're going to be, I think, perhaps a little bit restricted. We'll see that I thought we might have a smoother movement through the waist. That is really odd. It's just, it's fighting me. It does not want to turn. That could just be my very specific figure, you know, just sometimes the plastic just doesn't want to work with you. Somebody else's might be very nice and smooth, but just that's my experience with this particular figure. Very odd. So, okay, so let's test out the articulation on the legs. We've got, of course, that very high on the thigh swivel point. Sometimes it's a little bit lower, but it's kind of up here and hidden, trying to sort of hide along with the hemline of these tunic pieces here, but you can just see it there. So they swivel very freely. Nice and easy. Of course, sometimes when it cuts in through there, it cuts through the sculpting. Because he has these large pockets, I understand why Hasbro chose to do the articulation sort of point nice and high. So it's not cutting through the pockets. Sometimes when the detail is so visible, it looks really odd to cut through it and sort of twist it. So we've got that good sort of articulation movement there. And as before, I figured that I could actually get him into a seated position, even though I don't think we really need to. And of course, his jacket does extend a lot lower than his seat, so he's not really going to be sitting in a cockpit like this anyway. But at least those splits on the side of his tunic in there are letting us actually get him into a seated position, which, to be honest, I wasn't really expecting. One of those things that's just sort of completely hidden when the figures are on their backing cards. I couldn't see the fact that there is going to be these big sort of splits on the under tunic, especially when they're not visible on the outside as well. Really interesting. So we can kick him forward, and we can get a bit, it kind of splays the jacket out. Not that we've got a beast for him to ride. There are speeders in the show. It'd be fun if maybe we got some speeders one day that him and Luthen Rail ride on Ferrix, but for now, I can do that if I want. And of course, very easy at the hips, very easy movements. Of course, going towards the back, we are going to be a little bit limited by that jacket. It technically can splay, but because it's so long, it's kind of just fighting. It's not really going to stay there. I can get to about there because the jacket is just flared out to the back. So it's mostly just sort of the natural spot, but you can see that cross section of that jacket. It is so thick. It's not really ever going to hold that flexed position. It's going to fight its way back to its neutral position. Okay, let's test out the knees. A little bit tricky with the jacket in the way. Oh, very easy knees. Very easy. Again, the legs are actually proving to be a little bit more flexible than I thought. Oh, this one's actually kind of stiff. Okay, that knee moved easily. This one is fighting me. Can I get this one to move? There we go. Very stiff. Unusual. Usually I have ones that one was very easy. That one, I don't even really need to put that much pressure on it. This one, oh, that's a fight. Interesting. Okay, so I can get him into a good kneeling position there if I want. We can see the way that the pants would kind of cover over it. So it's kind of generally pretty well hidden from the front. Of course, when we're going to do that full bend there in the knees, we're going to see the articulation point. But I do like the way that oh gosh, that is stiff. In the modern figures, it generally tapers down a little bit more in the front and cuts up high in the back. So we can see the articulation there at the back of the knees. Interesting that these are not sort of, usually when I'm looking at this in the back, it's usually a bit smooth. We've actually got a bit of texture here. It's kind of blending in well with the texture of the pants, but it's kind of rippled. I wonder if that is giving me a little bit of that resistance when I'm trying to flex that, because it's usually a little bit smoother like the front of the knee. Interesting. And of course, we've got the ankles. Oh, very tight on the ankles. Oh, very tight. Okay. Wow, that one's really fighting me. I can get that one pointed. There is some interesting... I thought his legs might be good because I could move him at the hips so well. That is a really tight, really tight. I don't think that one's actually going to go much... Yeah, I can get just a little bit of a click there. This one I could get more forward. And of course I can sort of roll them around a little bit there as well. And they have points there on the underside, which might be very useful for him now that I've played around with his legs. I'm going to see just how well he might stand up, because I was having some issues earlier. You can kind of see, because I've played around with his legs, he just wants to fall over now. I'm going to have to spend a bit of time. He's completely unbalanced. He's definitely going to be a trickier one. This big plastic jacket, when I was doing it before, I basically had to crouch him forward, which is not the pose I want. So just sort of out of the box, he kind of has to crouch forward just to balance this big jacket. So it's definitely going to take me a little bit of time just to kind of get just the right sort of tweaks with his legs, just to kind of get him into a position, which is not my favorite. I know I say that I take accuracy over articulation, but I do still want my figures to be able to stand up on their own, because of course these peg holes are smaller than older action figures, so they don't fit the stands that I have. I get the feeling he might need a stand, which is a little bit annoying. I like this jacket, but I wish I could get him to stand up a little bit better. I got him there once out of the box. It's definitely going to take a bit. He just wants to tip back. Oh well. I'll spend some time later getting him into the standing position. So he comes with one blaster pistol accessory here. It's quite small, quite flat. I do love his blaster pistol in the show. It reminds me of the Briar blaster pistol that Kyle Katarn used. Of course, he was in some of the original Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy video games and comics. spikes. And of course, in the old expanded universe, he was the one that managed to get the Death Star plans. So I like that there, whether it's intentional or not, I like that there feels like there's a bit of a nod to the original sort of storytelling of how the Death Star plans got into the Rebel Alliance, which of course in Rogue One, we know that it is Cassian and Jyn Erso. So I don't know, whether it's intentional or not, I like that little nod. I have to say that this is a little bit bendy. It's kind of a little bit rubbery, and I was expecting it to be a little bit more rigid, particularly around the grip. That feels, it's very bendy, and that it's probably due to just how thin this is, but it also feels like it's made out of a rubbery sort of plastic, kind of like this. And I guess when it's that thin, if it's brittle, it's more prone to snapping. With this sort of thinness, of course, it's just going to bend a little bit. So I'm going to be careful to make sure that I don't sort of give it a permanent bend, because it always looks a little bit odd when your blasters and accessories are just kind of permanently a little bit wobbly in the bending. But it looks like a fairly slimline grip. We've got a little bit of a squarish cutout there for the trigger guard. It's not a full circle, so I'm hoping that this is going to go into his hand very easily. So just going to slide that in there, and boom, just clips on around over his finger. It doesn't have to sort of fit into a little loop trigger guard or anything like that. You can see the way that he holds it there. Very easy. Nice. I like the small modern accessories. Some of those crazy big ones back in the old sort of Power of the Force 2 green card, red card era, they were wild. I love, even though they look kind of small and perhaps a little bit insignificant, I much prefer them being appropriately scaled to the characters. It's kind of interesting, I guess, because on Ferrix you're not really supposed to be carrying weapons. This version of Cassian does not have a holster. There isn't anywhere to put a holster on him. We can kind of peek there underneath. There's nothing on his pants or on his hip. So we've just got those little sort of metal tool devices, communicators kind of things there on his belt there. No blaster sort of hiding place there on his belt. So it's useful that he can hold it very well. Let's just test out his left hand, because I wasn't expecting that one to have a separate trigger guard finger. That one actually kind of slipped all the way through. Just trying to get that lined up a little bit more, a little bit awkward, but just because the actual grip is so small, it just kind of slid all the way through. But that does actually work there in his left hand if we want to. If we want to give him something else to hold, maybe he's going to come out guns blazing with a few accessories. Maybe he got a stormtrooper blaster rifle of somebody. But yeah, that's kind of fun that he can actually hold his included blaster accessory in either hand. Gives us a few posing options. Even if perhaps he doesn't actually wield it with his left hand, we can get him to hold it. So that's kind of fun. So overall, pretty cool figure. I like the details. I think those cutouts on the undershirt are perhaps a little bit large, but they do give us good articulation there on the legs. The jacket, I love the jacket. I like the fact that we don't have cutouts here, because I think sometimes they just really break up the detail, and it doesn't really seem to limit the movement that we can get in the legs either. So I'm glad about that. But just because of this heavy jacket, and it could just be, I've just got to spend a little bit of time. Maybe it was the way that he came out of the packet, just having a little bit of a time trying to get him to stand upright. He's just wanting to tip over. You can see he just wants to tip back. So I'm going to spend a bit of time getting him into a good position later on, but I'm just really excited to see him out. I love the Andor series, and I'm trying to build up a display. There's not as many from the vintage collection. Definitely got a couple that I'm trying to track down. Sadly for us here in New Zealand, not all releases from the Black series and vintage collection make it to stock us here. So sometimes after a while of waiting, we finally have to give up and go source it internationally, which is unfortunately the case for a few of the Andor figures. So I'm going to be tracking those down, because I love the series and I want to really have a fun action figure display of some of the cool characters from the Andor series. So I mentioned earlier that I had a couple of other Andor figures that I just wanted to take a quick comparison to. So I have here, this is VC267, was released shortly after this one. This is 261, this is 267. This one is Cassian for the Aldhani mission. So he is wearing an Imperial disguise. Now, I'll just put this one down for a minute. So this one, he does have hair, but you can see it's looking a little bit flatter. Now, he does come with an Imperial officer hat. So that is why that is flat, because he is supposed to be wearing that over the top. But you can see that the hair on this one is actually sculpted as part of the head piece as opposed to this one, which has a separate piece. So his hair looks a lot flatter, and it's kind of fun to see the differences in the face paint and application as well. If I can just get this one to put his blaster down there at the side so we can see. This one, he has much more of a beard to the point where it's actually sculpted in a 3D nature and then painted over. Here he is not quite clean shaven, but he has a little bit more of sort of stubble and shadow. So he looks and sculpted more clean shaven, and then we have that digital printing for the facial hair as well. Both are really good likenesses for Cassian. He obviously looks very different without that facial hair and his hair a little bit flatter, but I can still see the Diego Luna likeness there on it. It's really quite fun. Of course, the costumes are very different, so we're not really going to have much to compare there. Just having a little look, they do look about the approximately same height as well. Just standing them side by side. Of course, sometimes, you know, the costume details, whatever boots and articulation they have. This one stands up really well. He's good out of the box. This one, I kind of have to hold him there because he's going to want to tip over. Really fun to see some differences. Of course, Cassian, he's the lead for the series. We should have him in different outfits. I think this was a really good sort of options for the first ones to release. Of course, we do see him wearing some other outfits. I'm hoping to see that Narkina 5 prison outfit, and of course a Kino Loy, and maybe even a few others. Even if Hasbro gave us one of those sort of black and white army builder boxes of just Narkina 5 prisoners, that would be really fun too, with, like, you know, Kino Loy is like the headline one. That would be fun. Such an iconic sort of series arc in the Andor storyline. Okay, and the other figure that I just want to take a quick little comparison, this one is a slightly older figure, but it was recently re-released. This is VC130. So this is actually Cassian from Rogue One. So of course not a direct comparison, but it is a little bit older. So you can see the sculpting style of the face here. And I do think that this newer one looks more like Diego Luna. I can't quite put my finger on it, but they have really sort of upped their game when it comes to facial sculpts and things like that. This one still looks like Cassian, but somehow this one just looks more like Cassian. I think it's really fun. Obviously, when they re-released it, they just gave us a straight re-release. They didn't do any sort of updated facial sculpt or tooling or anything like that. But that was really great because for me personally, we never got the first release of this particular figure. I was able to grab it during the re-release. So of course, for Cassian fans that are pulling out their sort of their favorite figures and things like that, it's fun to be able to add this one because, of course, the original Rogue One film came out during Hasbro's unfortunate 5-point of articulation era. So most of my Rogue One figures are not the best. I don't particularly like the sculpting on those figures. I didn't actually really mind the articulation limitations too much, but the sculpting, they're quite night and day to the vintage collection. So I'm really happy to see them reissuing some figures for fans that are trying to basically rebuild their Rogue One collection with vintage collection figures. He looks very cool. You can see that sort of mid-torso articulation on this figure as well. Interesting that they went with the one lined up with the belt, whereas in this one, it's cutting right through the shirt rather at the belt line. Very interesting to see the different approaches there. But yeah, this one's a little bit older. I really like it where Hasbro is able to go with their modern sculpting and paint applications. So overall, really cool figure. I have to say, I don't like to play favorites, but I think the Black Series version of this one I do like better. There's just something about just the way that that one came out. I think particularly the way that I'm having a trouble standing this one up. I like just about all of the other details. I really like the fact that you can actually hold the blaster in his other hand. That's not a common thing, but just I have to just knock it down a point or two just because I'm having a trouble standing this up. But like I say, I do like the accuracy of that coat, and I can't sort of critique Hasbro for giving me something that I actually would prefer. So just going to have to spend a bit of time standing him up. But in terms of all of the other details that I'm looking for in a figure, this hits all the right spots. Now I just need more figures from the Andor series. Please, Hasbro, give us more before we get to Andor Series 2. Maybe they're waiting to release a whole bunch to tie in with that series release, but I don't want to wait anymore. I really love this series and I want more Star Wars toys from Andor in my collection. So this was a lot of fun. Some really interesting sort of aspects to this figure that I wasn't quite expecting, but that's always the adventure when you finally get your toys out of their packaging. So there's always sometimes these things that you are not quite expect or are completely hidden away in the plastic bubble. So this was really fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Star Wars vintage collection figure and checked out all of the details and did a little comparison as well. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I recently opened up the Valsatha figure VC262. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.